Okay. Welcome. My name is Mike Sperlinger. I'm sitting here in this kind of comfortable space at UKS with Ayat Teleubek, who has the current show. You will meet a bird with strange feet, which is on till Sunday. And we're just going to have a kind of conversation about the show. And we're going to encourage you, if you haven't seen it, to come see it before Sunday. It's been a real pleasure to spend time again in the show. I came for the opening, but it's kind of a long film actually, and it really rewards, in fact, it kind of demands reviewing, I think. And there's a lot of different ways we could kind of unpack the film. But so the film, it's 70 minutes-ish.
Yeah, 67.
67.
Or 68. Yeah, somewhat around 70.
And it's kind of, you experienced it in the space in a particular way that maybe we can go back and touch on. So it's the installation, which you can see part of here is quite particular. But maybe we can just actually start with the film itself. And we could maybe start with this kind of character who seems, at least at the beginning, to be quite central to it. So that the film's kind of starting point anyway is this kind of charismatic TV healer from the Soviet Union from the 80s called Alan Shamak.
Yeah.
And you know, the film in a way is a kind of unpacking of your, well, maybe it is. It's a kind of, it's some kind of thinking through of this I guess in Kazakhstan and in the USSR, like very notorious, famous figure. But what was your relationship to him? Like what? Because he must have been on TV when you were quite young, I guess, right? Do you remember these broadcasts that you're starting from, or is it more like a kind of family folk memory?
I will answer your question, but first I would like to thank you for joining and for this interview, and I would like also to thank UKS for producing this film and for making this show happen. It was a very pleasant experience working, and I would also like to thank Bergen Center for Electronic Kunst and Aldea, where I had the pleasure to edit this film in Bergen during a residency in autumn, who also helped me immensely with the production of this film. And also I would like to thank all of the people who were involved. Of course, the central figures is Ida and Nina, but also Istvan, who did the camera work, and Ingun, Marlene, and Lisa, and also my mom, and who is watching now, hopefully, and my aunt. But when it comes to Chumak, I was around maybe 3, 4, 5 years old when he was on the TV, and he is very popular figure in the USSR and post-USSR. Everyone knows about him, or at least people of my age and older, because he was appearing on I think once a week or daily, I don't exactly remember, maybe. And then the entirety of USSR was captivated by his persona and really believed in his healing and his seances. But the reason why it was interesting for me is I thought that he might be one of the first figures who led to a situation that is in Kazakhstan, but also in the post-Soviet countries, where people believe a lot in all types of alternative practices. So if you would go to Kazakhstan, they would ask, what's your name, where you come from, and then how old are you? And then they would ask, what's your zodiac sign?
Okay.
And a lot of people have beliefs in starting from astrology to, like, let's say, all types of Asian medicines, to healing practices, to yoga, to numerology, and everything gets mixed up. And it's a huge, it's a huge part of the culture. But it was not like this, obviously, during the Soviet Union, when with the regime of anti-religion, and where the religion was suppressed, and all types of alternative things were suppressed, where everything was based on Marxism and materialist ideology. And he was, I think, one of the first figures who brought in these types of alternative practices from below the surface up. And that's why I think I brought him. I thought it would be interesting to explore his persona a bit more.
Yeah. But it's very interesting because, like I say, when we were talking before, and when I first saw the film, I somehow thought he was very central to this piece of work.
Yeah.
But in fact, he, in a way, watching it again, he's quite peripheral. So, for example, there's a very conscious decision that although you're talking about, or the characters in the film are talking about these broadcasts, it takes at least 20 minutes before we see them. And when we do see them, it's on a kind of laptop screen at an angle. We never really get to see those broadcasts. So he's very sidelined.
Yeah.
Can you just talk about that, about what this decision to kind of invoke him, but then really not to kind of want to invoke the original footage, for example?
Yeah. I think it was an intuitive decision not to include him too much, and also logistical one, because there is a lot of footage of him appearing on the TV, but very little footage, none of the footage almost. I was in contact with the film archive in Russia, in Moscow, and I made an official request, and there was just like one very short clip from a documentary where they filmed people watching him on the TV, but that was maybe like 10 seconds long. And including him, integrating him during the montage of some of his seances there didn't really make much sense, because then he would, since I feel that he's kind of a charismatic person, and then he would take a lot of attention towards himself, and then it would be about his personality and not so much about the effect that he had on the society, or types of alternative practices that have effect on the society.
Yeah.
And so it was a conscious decision. But then I thought it would be not fair not to include him at all, because I think people would be sitting and Googling his name while watching the film. So he appears not too early, but not too late in the film. And,
just to get it out of the way.
Yeah.
It's interesting because because he's peripheral in a way, the main protagonists of the film are, you already mentioned Nina and Ida, I guess, and you're a kind of bit part player in this.
Yeah.
So you kind of introduced the story of Shimak through this conversation over FaceTime with your aunt, who sort of remembers him. But then it's quite quickly kind of handed over to Nina and Ida, who are then kind of involved in this reenactment process. Can you talk, because I know this is a question that's come up about the show a little bit, about their role. So there's a very interesting moment at the beginning where you have a disclaimer where it says, like, the opinions expressed by the characters are the characters, not the kind of people playing them.
Yeah.
So there's this real kind of insistence on the kind of fictional structure, even though it has this very documentary feel.
I actually thought about him a lot when all types of, the idea came maybe in March with the lockdown and with all of the conspiracy theories rising up with the 5G and China doing it by purpose, and then everything being fake, and etc. and etc. So with this utter disbelief onto the medical authorities, all authorities in general, I thought, how can these types of things be explored? First idea, as it always is to kind of like gather a lot of archival footage and then make a kind of a montage and present it as a typical kind of like a video piece. But I thought it was not really interesting, nor did it give any justice to in terms of like finding out what is interesting about these things. And so I thought maybe reenacting one of his, let's say, performances or healing seances would be an interesting thing to do. And that would be interesting to kind of like find out what are the mechanisms that lead a person to believe that he or she has healing powers, or what are the mechanisms when a viewer gets convinced by the healing powers of someone. And I thought to work with other people who were not acquainted with him, to look at the footage, to read a bit about him, to discuss it, and then to practice, and then to discuss choices of costumes and the introductions and all the technicalities in order to find out what would be a healing. What does healing consist of? Or basically, how is magic produced? And then I asked Mina, and then I asked Ida to participate, and they were.
Why those two? Because it's interesting, like because they both bring, because Ida's a designer, Mina's a choreographer, and they both definitely bring elements of their knowledge, experience to the roles. But why those roles for them? So you didn't work with someone who had an interest, particularly in spiritual practices.
Yeah.
What was it you wanted to, in terms of kind of employing them in those roles?
I thought they were very smart, first of all. But I think because Mina I think she's one of the very few dancers that I know. And I thought that bodily movements is something that is very important for reenacting it. And since Mina is a dancer and the choreographer, I thought it was quite obvious. And also, and Ida, I didn't know her so well before the film, but I thought she had both of them had this balance between being critical but also being open-minded. Because with this issue, I don't think it's a valid, or it's not a productive strategy to completely dismiss it or to ridicule, or by other hand, to completely embrace oneself into it. So it needs kind of like a independence or autonomy. So I thought they two were would be a good match in terms of reenacting and exploring the material.
And so what was the process with them? Like you gave them material to kind of read and come back with, or did you how much were you kind of scripting what they did, and how much were you just kind of giving them parameters and kind of letting them go?
Yeah, I chose the set, which was Mina's studio. And also I chose the amount of days. It was shot during 5 days, and each day lasted from 10 to 2 in the afternoon for 4 hours with a short lunch break. And I think in the beginning of each day, I kind of asked some introductory questions, and they were discussing it through. And then they also took things in their own hands as well. But sometimes I also interrupted them and asked them, could you talk about this a bit more? Or sometimes I even told them, okay, could you, for the sake of the film, could you do this now? Or could you say this now?
And there's a couple of moments in the film where you're still present in a way as a kind of third dialogue partner, but mostly you step out.
Yeah. I don't know why. I think I didn't want to be present a lot in the film because I have my kind of a set of ideas about Schumacher that are already conceived and rock solid, and I didn't really want to impose them on them because that would mute their own thoughts about it. So.
Well, I guess one of the things that, like watching it again, that I really thought about was this. I mean, they talk a lot in the dialogue, right, about trustworthiness, and about, for example, that his movements. I think quite early on, maybe it's Mina talks about this. That it's actually that just the kind of character of his movements encourages a certain belief in him.
Yeah,
it produces a kind of trust in the viewer.
Yeah,
and that just seems to come back again and again in the film as a topic about the kind of the rhetoric of trustworthiness. Like also, like for example, what sweater she's wearing. Like Ida's kind of dressing her to be believable, and yet at the same time, there is this kind of question that we as viewers have about them and them as characters and their believability. Can you just talk about that that dynamic or that kind within the film, that kind of question of transmitting believability in a way?
Yeah, that is the main question that I was interested in. What elements make a character or a person trustworthy? Obviously, it's the way people dress affects a lot, and but also there was this question about whether technology like the electromagnetic waves with the TV technology or cathode ray tubes, these physical phenomena that are very abstract to most of the people, whether they play some part in adding up or somehow intertwining with his persona, which makes him even more trustworthy.
Can you say more, just unpack that a little bit, that thought? Because it's so interesting, that idea that like, why would the cathode ray tube, the fact that I'm watching him on a TV, why does that produce this extra quality of belief, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like now people, I guess, don't really believe in like news on the internet. Let's say when we read news articles on the internet, we always have a grain of criticality, always questioning where it comes from, who is writing it, and who is benefiting from publishing this news, right? But before, with the TV, and especially, I guess, in the Soviet Union, where all the TV was state-run, it was the ultimate source of authority, of information. Obviously, there was people who didn't believe in anything, but I think the majority of the population were convinced by the information that was coming from the TV. And so that was, of course, the power dynamics was very important with the TV. That gave him credibility. But I also think there is a certain element of magic in the technology itself, which plays maybe an important role in it. I think it was Arthur C. Clarke, was he a science fiction writer, who said, or who wrote something like, a sufficiently advanced technology can be considered as magic or can be seen as magic. And I think that, I mean, I don't think like majority of people understand how TV works or how the information gets transmitted through the air, which is like it's kind of a magic in itself. And then this persona suddenly appearing there and then saying, I will transmit you a charge now, I will transmit you a healing through these radio waves. It sounds like total nonsense, but for someone for whom these things are abstract or completely unexplainable, might believe in this.
So it's like almost just the act of like switching on my TV set. I've already made this big leap of faith before I watch whatever's on it.
Yeah,
I think that's really interesting. Yeah. That it's connected. Yeah.
And also the fact that it was also live, that so there was like an element of his presence, I think, played an important role.
Because I definitely had this feeling, again, watching it for a second time, particularly that it is a work that's partly about television, whatever television is. Like, because television obviously is in some ways like a technology, but it's like many technologies. It's more like a cultural form, somehow, TV. Yeah. And I guess one of the things that I noticed was the work really seems to be, you in one of the moments when you appear, for example, you talk about the way that the screen flattens things, that different things get collapsed in on a screen. Yeah. But the film itself seems to be almost like, partly through its length also, like trying to stretch out and kind of separate all of these layers and make us very aware that we're looking at screens within screens. We're looking at your iPhone. Can you just talk about that, this kind of relationship to television as a kind of form of consumption of images, and then also what's happened to television now in terms of the kind of media ecosystem that you're working in? It's a big question.
That's a very difficult question, and I don't know the answer to that, to be honest. And that was the reason I decided to make this film.
But what about this? Because I think one thing that I thought watching it was that actually visually, it looks a bit like TV.
Yeah.
So that in terms of like, it seems to have made a set of choices about the way in which people are framed is quite, for example, it's quite central. People are quite centered quite a lot of time. Is this, you know, and the way it's lit, it's not filmic in that sense. It's not looking to be cinema.
Yeah.
Can you say like, it just seems like in terms of that level, and again, how that relates to the questions of believability and so on, but there seemed to be a deliberate drawing on a kind of TV rhetoric of shot counter shot from certain kinds of like documentary or.
Yeah. I think it was those decisions were also intuitive and also done together with Istvan as well, who was the camera, who was responsible for the camera.
Right.
I think it was also a lot of it was decided by the logistics as well, that there were two cameras to capture everything that was happening in that space from two different angles. And but yeah, I haven't thought actually that it was kind of within the TV aesthetics. I was more thinking that it would be like this typical documentation of a conference or a panel discussion.
Yeah, okay.
I was thinking more in terms of that, and having experience working freelance, filming with these types of conferences, it kind of like naturally seeped through, I think, into this film as well.
But can you maybe you could say something, because it is also like a big jump for you in terms of working, because you like certainly the work of yours that I know has more been kind of sculpture installation, often very complex and technically complex, but you've kind of gone from that to making like a 68-minute kind of feature film in a way.
Yeah.
And you were saying in a way it's been like a long-term aspiration, but I know there were a lot of decisions along the way, for example, about how long this should actually be. Like it could have been shorter, but you made a decision at a certain point to really work with the huge amount of material you'd shot and to really.
Yeah.
But can you just talk about that experience of kind of learning to work maybe more with the.
Yeah. So I thought like 5 days, or was it 4 or 5? I think it was 5 days of filming for 4 hours or 5 hours every day would give me enough material to produce a kind of statement or a kind of a coherent material. And after gathering like 20 hours of footage, it was a painstaking but very interesting process as well in terms of editing it. And there could be like several different types of narratives built up, but obviously I chose the parts that I thought were the most relevant and interesting to myself to hear about. Like for example, the part where Ida and Mina discuss about this topic of healing a person or self-healing versus like healing the society, or some of their dynamics, interpersonal dynamics, how they built it up, or how they also changed their perspectives throughout the shoot. That in the beginning they're kind of curious, and then one of them is positive, but then after some time they're completely skeptical, and this development I thought was somehow interesting to include.
Yeah. Because it's very interesting that the focus does shift in the second part to these kind of questions of care and community that comes up in their dialogue. And I guess one of the other things the film does is it creates this sense of like the audience shifting as well. So at a certain moment, they're thinking about the audience being this group of volunteers that they're going to work with, who are going to have this transmitted to them. But obviously there's another layer, which is us as the audience. I mean, I guess this, for me, kind of linked back to this TV thing a little bit, right? The kind of like Jean-Luc Godard, the film director, had this a phrase I think about a lot about cinema being somewhere we go together to be alone, and television where we go alone to be together. And and they talk about this a bit in the, like, I can't remember it's Mina or Ida, but talking about this idea about this kind of being together individually. Can you just talk about that? Because obviously that does feel like, without wanting to necessarily bring COVID into this, that did feel like it. it related very much to the moment.
It was after the group exercise. One of the participants, Ingun, she pointed out that it was an interesting phenomena where, as you said, that Godard said that it's a way of being together, but in each everyone being by themselves in their living rooms, looking at these seances, and then knowing that everyone else in the whole country
it's live,
is doing that because it's live. Yeah, that it kind of builds some sense of community was interesting. And then she pointed out after the exercise, which was not included in the film, but then it was brought up the next day, the day when Ida got a bit, she got a minor cold, and then since it was COVID, she had to stay at home and not come. And then, so I thought, like when she called me that morning, it felt like, oh shit, okay, we'll have to postpone the shoot. But then thinking that it's a pandemic and it's shot during the pandemic, it was like
we have a parcel delivery, so if someone can get the door.
Yeah,
this is live, by the way, just in case.
So I thought it was also interesting to include that, to have them talk through the screen as well. That was and it was like an interesting accident and a development in the film.
Yeah. No, and I guess there's also something about, I guess what I got very curious about was they have another very interesting conversation about care and about individual people being transmitters and receivers, and about are there people who maybe like Shamuk or whatever, but who are particularly transmitters.
Yeah.
And I guess I was kind of curious about that, for example, in terms of an art practice. Like, do you think this has relevance for thinking about what an art practice does? Or
yeah, I think that the care aspect is something that really convinced me, or gave an answer basically why people turn on to healing practices or alternative practices. And that's especially relevant for the Soviet Union and post-Soviet Union states, where let's say the Western institutionalized medicine is not as developed as in the West, let's say, or here in Norway. When I went first time to my doctor here, I was shocked how the doctor was nice to me. I was shocked that she asked, "How are you doing? What's your name?" And we had like a small talk for 3 minutes. She introduced herself and asked a lot of questions about me. And I thought, this is very strange that she's being so nice or friendly, because these things do not happen in, I guess, majority of the world, because there is a very obvious hierarchy built up. And especially, for example, in the Soviet medicine, like when an ambulance comes home, they never take their shoes off, because they're instructed, or they learn in the universities, not to take shoes off. Because if you don't take your shoes off and you come in, you kind of assume your position of authority. So, and that's how the whole system is built, that the doctor is an authority and the patient must just obey. And obviously these things do not help in terms of care, because care is maybe one of the most important parts within the healing process. And having someone being genuinely interested in you and genuinely taking care of you has a lot to do with the healing process, being in the institutionalized Western medicine or in all types of healing practice. And I think it's also part of the medical science, right? That it's a huge part of. But
maybe that's why it's so interesting in relationship to like a healer on TV.
Yeah.
Because that kind of care that you talk about, kind of reciprocity that you get from your Norwegian doctor, it's like you're not getting that from Shamuk in a way. So that this kind of it's very interesting. Like what is produced in that kind of completely one way transmission of care.
That's. Sorry, what was your question?
Oh no, I guess I guess I'm kind of interested in the, because the film itself seems to be very interested in that question of precisely what happens when the kind of really physical, interpersonal
Yeah.
interaction you talked about, like with your doctor, is interrupted, and like the forms of care are sort of tele-distanced in different ways.
Yeah.
And the film itself seems to be dealing with all these different forms of tele-distance, whether it's you to your family back home, or that. I'm just curious about if you could say more about that, and also maybe about what kind of transmission the work itself is. Like, how does your work function as a transmission of a certain kind of care? Or is that a bad frame?
No. I think my film is not about transmitting any type of care. I think it's more about making people aware, I think, about the mechanisms of care and mechanisms of healing and of alternative practices. The ambition, I was trying to kind of unpack this difficult question of alternative practices within the film by showing two persons interact in length and discuss it in length and practice it as well. Because I don't think that like the film ends with Nina giving a healing to the audience, but I don't think she's that convincing, not because she's not able to, but because it was not really the motivation to make her convincing in the end. It was more about making them aware, making the viewer aware of when someone becomes convincing and when someone is not.
I think that's very interesting because I can completely see that. But I have to say, like, for me, in a way, what's funny about the end is that you've had an hour before that of like demystifying charismatic authority, and yet I actually found it. I find it kind of quite compelling still. Like, even though you know all that, it's kind of interesting how effective that kind of really dancer-like choreography of those movements are, and the direct address. Even when you know the trick, it still has an effect in a way. And I think that's why I think it's such a strong into the film.
Okay. Oh. Okay. I didn't think it. Yeah. I thought it would be like completely. Maybe then I failed to make it completely not to work. I thought. Yeah.
You were wanting like a much more Brechtian kind of like just self-canceling kind of.
Yeah. Huh. That's interesting. Well. Yeah, why not?
Can we just talk just briefly also about, because I think we really need to acknowledge also the installation in the space.
Yeah.
Like, you're sitting on a piece of design furniture that's been kind of made for this, and there's some even more special chairs in there that people can see. And I guess there's a kind of simultaneity, right, when people come, because the film starts at the same time, but you're watching in these different pods. There's like 3 different kind of pods.
Yeah.
But each with drapery, carpet, furniture. Can you just say about that as the kind of space for viewing?
I kind of like to joke about this show as being the most COVID-friendly show ever made. So it has 3 rooms which look somewhat similar, with the same carpet and kind of the same
white clean surface, and
which I made. So the idea was to design something that would be in between a living room and a medical center. So like this, I think the curtains somehow they're very typical for a hospital setting where they separate spaces. And then the blue is very present because it's also very interesting that the blue is used a lot within the medical science as a color of something which is supposed to calm you down. But then there is this term which is also clinical when you say something is clinical. And then there is a long history of like designing spaces for hospitals, how to make it ergonomically easily cleanable if there is any bodily liquids or bacteria. but at the same time comfortable, and at the same time very sturdy. So I was particularly interested in that kind of ergonomics, and medical centers and hospitals at the same time having these challenges, but at the same time having challenge of being relatable to a human somehow. But then they completely fail because they all look the same and there is any lack of individuality
And they're both kind of comfortable and not comfortable.
Yeah.
Like the chairs in there, which are kind of more comfortable, but you're sitting at an angle where you feel very self-conscious.
Yeah.
So this sort of
Yeah. I thought about those chairs as that the dentist chair was the main inspiration for me, because the dentist chair, when you look at it, it's just like ultimate horror to look at. But then when you sit down in it, it's the most comfortable chair you can imagine, basically, because there was like thousands and millions of man-hours spent on designing the chair and alleviating your pain sitting on the dentist chair.
Yeah.
But but just looking at it is just
It conjures horror.
Yeah.
I got a couple more questions. I'm sort of aware of time, but I guess one thing I'd be curious about would be like what were the other kind of inspirations for this as a piece of work? I mean, I guess one of the things that I thought about was that, again, although we talked a lot about TV, one of the genres I felt that it was also drawing on was a bit like the kind of YouTube artists react thing, or like people react.
Yeah.
Like, this, so watching people watch, which is like a very big part of internet culture now.
Yeah.
But I guess I was just curious, like, what for you, like, were there other kind of things that when you were kind of working on this very enormous edit project and so on, thinking about about the installation, like, what else fed into this?
The film starts with this, like, someone reacts to something, right? But then on there, like, they have like a small picture-in-picture type of thing where they show original footage, so you can see, and you probably already watched, let's say, a music video if someone is reacting to a music video, so you know.
Yeah.
But there I made a conscious decision not to include his picture, and then make, I guess, incite viewers to try to imagine how he looks like when they say, he's dressed very normally and casually, that's very strange, or he has these strange bodily movements, or like, what is he saying now? I guess, it was inspired by the internet, YouTube aesthetics a bit, but
And it does seem very, in this show, it's hard to imagine it outside of this installation, but would you like it to have a life as a feature? Like, can you imagine this in like a documentary festival or something? Like, could this travel could this be on a cinema screen, or would you like it to be?
Yeah, I think it's something interesting for me to explore, because I think it would be very interesting, and I think I will be working on that after the new year, trying to adapt it somehow to a cinema setting as well. But I think obviously it wouldn't match specifically designed exhibition setting, and also. Yeah, it's also something I never showed a film in a cinema before, or a video work or anything. I worked in a cinema as a technician before, so it would be also an interesting experience to show it within, let's say, a documentary film festival. And also the question is, like, how much is it a documentary as well?
Yeah.
It's also,
Yeah. Now, I guess I got very curious, kind of thinking how different it might be. Like, obviously, you see it with other people here, but only one or two in space.
Yeah.
And if we are ever in a situation where we're in cinemas with hundreds of people, like this, because it's a film that's very much about being like body awareness, and which again, the cinema tends to discourage. Like, the lights go down, and you're just on your own in your seat somehow, and you pretend to be.
I think if it will be shown, let's say, post-COVID, I think it could work. I hope it could work as a kind of a document of the pandemic times. I think it's a documentation. And in that sense, it's kind of like an archival material, because there is now a lot of things are going on. Like this very transmission is something super pandemic of the podcasts and live interviews and live conferences and etc.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important to think about all this material that is gathered now to archive it in a certain sense, in a certain way, because I think it would be interesting to come back to it, let's say, in 5 years or 10 years, if there is not another pandemic coming up, hopefully.
Hopefully not.
Yeah.
What about, just lastly, maybe just for you, what happens next? You have some work showing at Kunstnerhuis in January, hopefully?
Yeah. I would like to, so it's going to be a couple of works, or one work with 2 prints showing at the foyer. It was a very generous invitation from Kunstnerhuis. I think it's part of their program where they showcase artists who have exhibitions in other spaces in Oslo, but that got postponed to January. Apart from that, I would like to work more and explore more this question of production of magic and technology intertwined together. I think I don't know where it will lead now, but I think this is something that I've been interested for a long time, and even like you were the censor for the thesis during the academies, and I even wrote a bit about that as well. It was 6 years ago. I would like to continue with that.
Yeah. Exciting. I guess. We probably have to wrap. I guess also it's maybe getting to the end of people's lunchtime. If people, we don't want to extend people's lunch break too much. But thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you.
Thanks to UKS. And please come see the show before Sunday.
Sunday's the last day.
Sunday's the last day.
Stay safe.
Stay safe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was very nice. Thanks so much.